The back doors were propped open. That is what Savannah Guthrie said on camera this week for the first time. Not something investigators announced at a press conference. Not something a source leaked to a journalist. Savannah Guthrie herself, in her first public interview since her mother disappeared 56 days ago, described what her family found when they arrived at Nancy Guthrie's home on the morning of February 1st. The back doors were propped open. She said it in the context of trying to explain the first moments of confusion. The initial hope that maybe Nancy had simply had a medical episode, that maybe paramedics had come in the night and taken her out on a stretcher, that there was some explanation that didn't involve what the family was beginning to understand had actually happened. We thought that she must have had some kind of medical episode in the night and that somehow, the paramedics had come because the back doors were propped open, and that didn't make any sense. That phrase, the back doors were propped open, is 3 seconds of a 3-part interview that has generated enormous attention this week. But it deserves more attention than it has received because it connects to something that an experienced investigator noted weeks ago, something that has been sitting in the public record without being fully examined. Something that now has a family member confirming a detail that changes how we understand the possible entry point for whoever took Nancy Guthrie. Before we go any further, the facts that must be stated clearly: Nancy Guthrie's family, her daughters, her son-in-law, and every member of her immediate household was officially cleared as suspects by the Pima County Sheriff's Department on February 16, 2026. They are not suspects. They are victims of an ongoing crime. Everything in this video is based on verified public reporting, Savannah Guthrie's own words delivered on camera, and analysis from named, credentialed former FBI agents speaking on record. No one is being accused of any crime in connection with Nancy's disappearance. If you have any information about this case, please contact the FBI. You can submit tips online at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. Nancy Ellen Guthrie is 84 years old. She is the mother of NBC Today Show anchor Savannah Guthrie. She has been missing since the early morning hours of February 1st, 2026, from her home in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. She has a pacemaker. She requires daily medications. She was last seen by her family on the evening of January 31st when her son-in-law, Thomas Occhioni, dropped her at home after dinner with her daughter, Annie. The garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. It closed 2 minutes later. She was inside. At 1:32 a.m. on February 1st, a figure appeared on her Nest doorbell camera. Ski mask, thick gloves, a black Ozark Trail backpack already loaded, a holster at the front of the body. 15 minutes on the porch. At 1:47 a.m., the camera went dark. At 2:28 a.m., Nancy's pacemaker disconnected from its monitoring app. At 2:36 a.m., a vehicle appeared on a neighbor's Ring camera 2.5 miles away. When family arrived the following morning, they found blood on the front porch confirmed to be Nancy's. Her purse was inside, her wallet, her phone, her car, and the back doors were propped open. That detail, which Savannah shared this week in her conversation with Hoda Kotb, has not been explained publicly by the Pima County Sheriff's Department or the FBI. It was not part of the initial timeline released by Sheriff Chris Nanos on February 5th. It did not appear in the FBI's description of the scene. It has existed in this investigation, known to the family, known to investigators, and not disclosed to the public until Savannah mentioned it in an interview that she appears to have been granted wide latitude to speak candidly about her family's experience. The question that the back doors raise is direct and important. And if the primary camera was at the front door, the Nest doorbell camera that captured 15 minutes of a masked suspect before going dark, and if the back doors were propped open when the family arrived, what does that tell us about how entry was made, and how exit was made, and how Nancy Guthrie was removed from her own home? To understand why this matters, it helps to understand the physical layout of the property as it has been described in reporting and by family members. The garage is on the side of the house, not directly at the front, not directly at the back, but on a lateral face of the structure. Nancy came home through the garage on the night of January 31st. The garage door opened at 9:48 p.m. and closed 2 minutes later. From that moment until the doorbell camera captured the suspect at 1:32 a.m., the garage was the last confirmed entry point to the property. The front of the house faces the street where the doorbell camera was mounted. The security gate, the iron gate that master locksmith Terry Wynn Yates confirmed can be opened by an amateur in minutes, is also at the front. The back of the house faces in the direction of the other properties on the street, in the direction of the utility road that neighbor Jeff Leamy described running behind the homes in the neighborhood. 3 separate access points: the front with the camera and the security gate, the side with the garage, and the back, which is where the doors were propped open. Jennifer Coffindaffer is a retired FBI special agent with 25 years of experience. She has analyzed this case publicly through multiple media appearances, much speaking on record and under her own name. She is not a random internet theorist. She is someone who spent a career in federal law enforcement and who knows from experience how investigators communicate through their actions, even when they don't communicate through press conferences. Coffin Daffer made a specific observation about this case that has not received the attention it deserves. She noted that after investigators processed Nancy Guthrie's home, they changed the locks on the back of the house, not the front, not the sides, the back entrance, specifically the back entrance near the garage area. In investigative practice, this is not a bureaucratic action. Investigators do not change specific locks on a crime scene without specific reason. When they change the lock on a particular entrance, they are signaling to themselves and to anyone who understands what that action means that they believe that entrance was compromised, that it was used, that whatever happened at that doorway matters to the case. Coffin Daffer's public interpretation was clear. The lock change at the back of the house suggests investigators believe the primary entry point was not the front, not the iron security gate, not the doorbell camera side, but the back door. The door that Savannah now tells us was propped open when the family arrived. Nobody has explained why it was propped open. Not the sheriff's department, not the FBI, not any spokesperson or official in 56 days of investigation. The detail sat inside the family's knowledge, inside the investigators' files, and has emerged into the public record not through a planned disclosure, but through a daughter sitting across from a friend and trying to describe the chaos of what it was like to arrive at her mother's home and find her gone. Now let's examine what the open back doors actually mean in the context of everything else we know about this case, because there are at least 3 distinct possibilities, and each one carries different implications. The first possibility is that the back doors were propped open by the suspects as part of their exit strategy. If Nancy was taken through the front of the house, through the security gate, which master locksmith Terry Wynn Yates confirmed can be opened by an amateur in minutes using a basic lockpick, the suspects may have propped the back doors as a secondary exit point. In case they needed to move quickly in a direction that wasn't covered by the doorbell camera, they were actively disabling on the front porch. Under this reading, the back doors being open was planned. It was part of the operation. Someone inside the house or someone who arrived before the doorbell camera suspect appeared had already propped those doors in preparation for a rapid exit with Nancy. The blood evidence at the front porch, which former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed as consistent with Nancy being carried by 2 people, her head tilting as she was moved, would then need to be reconciled with the idea that she was ultimately taken out through the back, not through the front. The second possibility is that the suspects entered through the back and the front simultaneously. One person appearing at the doorbell camera, visible, deliberate, spending 15 minutes on the porch, as a distraction or as the camera disabling element of the operation, while another person entered through the back door, which was either already unlocked, picked, or accessible through the garage. This is the 2-person operation theory that multiple former FBI agents have endorsed as the most likely scenario. The blood on the front porch would then represent a moment when Nancy was brought to the front of the house, perhaps in the process of being moved, before being ultimately taken through a different route. The third possibility is the most significant for the investigation. In the back doors being propped open could be evidence that whoever took Nancy had knowledge of the property that goes beyond what a stranger could obtain from a single visit. A person who knows that propping the back door provides faster access to the street behind the property or to the utility road that neighbor Jeff Leamy described running behind the properties in that neighborhood, or to a vehicle positioned away from the front of the house, that person knows the layout. They have been there before. They have mapped the exit. They understood that the front was covered by a camera and that the back was the direction they needed to go. This connects directly to the 3 Saturday dates that investigators have been scrutinizing: January 11th, January 24th, and February 1st, and to what Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos confirmed on March 23rd, that the FBI's own digital analysis supports the belief that something occurred on January 11th. If the person who took Nancy came to that house 3 weeks earlier and walked the property, mapped the back exit, understood the garage, understood how to prop the back door without triggering the security gate alarm, then the open back doors on February 1st are not a coincidence or an improvised move. They are evidence of preparation. Nobody has explained why the back doors were propped open. That explanation may exist inside the investigation, but it has not been shared publicly. And its absence from the official narrative of this case is one of the most significant gaps in the public understanding of what actually happened on the night Nancy Guthrie was taken. Now let's step back and look at the full picture of what this week has revealed, because the back doors are only one of several significant new pieces of information that have emerged from Savannah Guthrie's three-part interview with Hoda Kotb, and from events in Tucson that have nothing to do with the interview. Savannah described the moment she learned her mother was missing with a level of detail that makes the timeline more concrete than it has ever been. She and her husband, Michael Feldman, had just arrived home. He had been away for a tennis trip. She had taken their children to colleague Carson Daly's house for the evening, and they were arriving at the same time putting down their bags when her sister Annie called. My sister called me, and I said, "Is everything okay?" And she said, "No." She said, "Mom's missing." And I said, "What? What are you talking about?" She said, "She's gone." The first instinct, the back doors, the hope that paramedics had come, lasted only moments, because the evidence at the scene immediately told the family something different. The back doors being propped open was one element. Blood on the front doorstep was another. The Ring camera being yanked off its mount was a third. "Something is very wrong here," Savannah said, describing what her family was saying to investigators from the earliest moments. Something is very wrong here. Within hours, Savannah was making the long journey to Tucson. When she arrived at Annie and Tomaso's home and saw her siblings, the moment was what she described as disbelief and hugging each other. The family was simultaneously on the phone with the sheriff, trying to communicate what they already understood from the scene. This was not a wandering. This was not a medical episode. This was something deliberate. "My mom, she was in tremendous pain," Savannah told Hoda Kotb. "Her back was very bad. On a good day, she could walk down to the mailbox and get the mail, but most days not, so there was no wander off." That physical detail matters for the investigation in a specific way. Nancy Guthrie, with severe back pain and limited mobility on her best days, could not have left her home and traveled any meaningful distance on foot. She could not have opened a door, walked down a driveway, short and disappeared into the night without assistance. Whatever happened to her required someone else to move her. Her physical condition makes the question of how she was transported from inside the house to a vehicle directly relevant to understanding the crime. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed the blood pattern on the front porch and concluded it was consistent with Nancy being carried by two people. Not walking, being carried, her head tilting as she was moved. The pattern of blood drops showed no voids, no gaps that would indicate someone stepping around the blood, as a walking person would create. The blood drops were consistent with someone being transported in a horizontal or near horizontal position. If Nancy was carried, consistent with both the blood evidence and her physical condition, then the back doors being propped open takes on additional significance. Carrying an 84-year-old woman through a narrow doorway requires planning. It requires a door that is held open, not just pushed. Someone had to prop that back door specifically because Nancy was going to be carried through it. Someone thought about that in advance. And then her brother Cameron, who spent his career in military intelligence and was a fighter pilot, cut through the confusion immediately. Even on the phone, before he had seen the scene himself, he understood. "He saw very clearly right away what this was," Savannah said. "And even on the phone when I called him, he knew. And he said, 'I think she's been kidnapped for ransom.'" Savannah's response was disbelief. "What? Do you think because of me?" Followed by the fear that has been at the center of her family's experience for 56 days. Cameron said, according to Savannah, "I'm sorry, sweetie, but yeah, maybe." That exchange carries a weight that goes beyond its emotional impact. Cameron Guthrie has a professional background in military intelligence and flew fighter aircraft. A career that requires not just technical skill, but the ability to rapidly assess a complex and chaotic situation and identify the most probable explanation. When someone with that background looks at the available evidence, the back doors propped open, the blood on the front porch, the camera yanked off the wall, the missing woman, and concludes immediately that this is a ransom kidnapping. And that conclusion is informed by pattern recognition. He was not guessing. He was applying the kind of rapid situational assessment that his career trained him to do. He was right, at least in the sense that the evidence is consistent with what he concluded. Whether the motive was ultimately ransom or something else, the investigation has not publicly resolved. But the family, and from the first hours, understood that this was not an accident, not a medical event, not a wandering. It was intentional, it was planned, and whoever planned it had been there before. The back doors were propped open. Cameron knew immediately, and somewhere in the 56 days since, the FBI has found evidence that something occurred at that property 3 weeks earlier, on January 11th, that they cannot yet fully explain. Savannah also confirmed something about the ransom notes that had not been stated so explicitly before. Multiple notes arrived at media organizations. Most of them, Savannah said, her family believes are not real. sent by people attempting to exploit a family's pain. But two specific notes that the family received and responded to, Savannah said she tends to believe are real. I believe the two notes that we received that we responded to, I tend to believe those are real. This is significant. The family responded to those two notes. They released a video saying, "We will pay." They said they had received the kidnapper's message and understood it. That response was calibrated and deliberate. And Savannah is now saying publicly that the two notes that generated that response are ones she believes came from whoever actually has Nancy. Those two notes, sent to media organizations, then shared with law enforcement, contain details that only someone with knowledge of the crime scene would know. KOLD anchor Mary Coleman, who saw the note her station received, said the information within the email appeared to be details known only by someone holding her for ransom. The notes referenced an Apple Watch and a floodlight at the property. The FBI took at least one of them seriously enough to call it legitimate. If Savannah is right, if those two notes came from whoever took her mother, then there was contact. There was a communication channel. The kidnappers, or whoever held Nancy, so put something into writing and sent it through a media outlet. They created a paper trail, or at least a digital one. They were watching, they were responding, and then they went silent. The silence after those two notes is one of the most analyzed aspects of this case. Former FBI agents have said repeatedly that the silence is unusual. Ransom kidnappers who make contact and then go silent have typically either lost their leverage because the victim is no longer alive, or are waiting. Waiting for the investigation to cool. Waiting for a moment when communication feels safer. Waiting because something in their plan went wrong and they are recalculating. None of that is confirmed. The FBI has not announced what they believe happened after those notes. The investigation continues. But Savannah's confirmation that her family believes two notes were real, combined with the silence that followed, combined with 56 days and no arrest, creates a picture of a communication that opened and then closed without resolution. Savannah also said something in the third part of her interview that aired on March 27th that deserves to stand on its own, separate from the investigative analysis. She was asked about returning to the Today Show. She confirmed she will return on April 6th, and she described her mindset in a way that is, if anything, more emotionally arresting than the tears and the apologies. "I will not let them take my joy. They will not take my sister's joy. They will not take my brother's joy. They will not take our love. They will not take our faith. My joy will be my protest. My joy will be my answer." And then moments later, "But our anguish is real. We need help. We need someone to tell the truth." Those two statements, joy as protest and anguish as truth, held simultaneously by the same person, are the most precise description of what a family goes through when a loved one is missing and the case has no resolution. You cannot simply grieve because grief requires finality. You cannot simply hope because hope without action feels insufficient. So you do both at once. You declare that joy will be your protest while acknowledging that the anguish is real. You say you're going back to work on April 6th while saying you don't know if you'll belong anymore. She said, "I think it's part of my purpose right now." Former FBI agent Jason Pack, speaking to Page 6, he said Savannah's return to the Today Show could meaningfully help the investigation. "Savannah has a platform most families do not have, and she is using it," Pack said. "Every morning that she sits behind that desk, her mother's face will stay in front of millions of people. That matters." He is right, and for a specific reason that goes beyond publicity. Cases like this one, active investigations with no arrest, no named suspect, and a community that is being asked to search its memory for details it may not have realized were significant, benefit enormously from sustained public attention. The moment a case fades from the news cycle, the calculation for anyone who knows something and is weighing whether to come forward tilts back towards silence. Savannah's return to a daily national platform is, among other things, a mechanism for keeping that calculation tilted the other way. Now we turn to the other development that has emerged this week, one that is entirely separate from Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, but that is impossible to discuss without acknowledging the context it creates. On March 26, 2026, the Tucson Police Department arrested Travis Reynolds, 22 years old, a deputy in the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the same department that is the lead agency in the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Reynolds was charged with one count of kidnapping. He was booked, appeared in court the following day, had his bond set at $200,000, and was fired by the Pima County Sheriff's Department after his arrest. The allegations against Reynolds, as described in court documents obtained by KOLD and reported by Fox News Digital, TMZ, Holland and multiple other outlets, involve conduct that prosecutors described as very, very concerning given his position of authority. According to the interim complaint, Reynolds was on duty and transporting a female detainee to the Pima County Jail when he allegedly made inappropriate comments about her appearance, shared a vape pen with her while she was in handcuffs, told her he could help with her case, and suggested they go to a hotel. He allegedly showed her explicit videos and refused to process her into the jail for an extended period. Even as other officers were moving their own detainees in and out of the facility, the state alleged at the hearing that the conduct may have occurred before, that this was not necessarily a one-time aberration. Prosecutors told the court the alleged victim was very afraid of Reynolds because of the power dynamic between them. Jail surveillance cameras confirmed parts of the account. Reynolds told investigators he may or may not have shown explicit material or discussed having sex with the detainee. This arrest is not connected to the Nancy Guthrie investigation. That must be stated clearly. The Tucson Police Department, in its statement confirming the arrest, made no reference to the Guthrie case. The Pima County Sheriff's Department, in its statement confirming Reynolds' termination, declined to comment on whether Reynolds had any role in the Guthrie investigation prior to his firing. There is no public information linking Reynolds to anything connected to Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. But the arrest exists in a specific context that is impossible to ignore. The Pima County Sheriff's Department is simultaneously the lead agency in one of the most high-profile missing person investigations in recent American history, and an institution whose sheriff just received a unanimous vote of no confidence from his own deputies, whose sheriff's 42-year career has been described by a county supervisor as appearing to be based on fraud, whose sheriff lied under oath about 8 suspensions in El Paso, and which now has a deputy charged with kidnapping the very kind of person its officers are entrusted to protect. That is not an accusation about the Guthrie investigation. It is a description of an institution that is, by any fair assessment, in significant institutional distress. And the question of whether an institution in significant institutional distress is the right agency to be leading a case of this magnitude, that question has been asked publicly by former FBI agents, by county supervisors, by the sheriff's own deputies, and now implicitly by the arrest of one of those deputies on a kidnapping charge. The investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance has the FBI as a parallel investigative force. The Bureau has its own task force, its own evidence analysis, its own digital forensics work. Whatever the state of the Sheriff's Department, the FBI has not stopped. The DNA from inside Nancy's home is being analyzed. The digital evidence that supports the belief that something occurred on January 11th is being worked. The tips, more than 40,000 of them, are being reviewed. But the institutional picture surrounding the county agency that is nominally in charge, the agency that was first on scene, the agency that processed the crime scene and made early decisions about what was preserved and what was released, that picture is now one of the most discussed aspects of this investigation, and it deserves to be discussed, not sensationally, but precisely, because the integrity of an investigation into the disappearance of an 84-year-old woman is not a political question. It is a question about whether justice is reachable, back to the back doors, because everything else, the ransom notes, Savannah's return, the deputy's arrest, the sheriff's crumbling credibility, orbits around the central mystery that has never been resolved. How did whoever took Nancy Guthrie get into that house? And how did they get out? The front door theory, the iron security gate, the suspect on the doorbell camera, has dominated coverage for 56 days. The narrative that took hold early was simple. The security gate made the front a difficult entry point. Therefore, someone must have been inside already. An accomplice with a key, an insider who let the suspect in from the front, the gate as the central architectural fact that shaped every theory about who was involved. But Terry Wynn Yates, the master locksmith with 25 years of professional experience, who appeared on Crime Stories with Nancy Grace, dismantled the idea that the iron gate was impenetrable. An amateur, he said, could open that lock in minutes. A professional in seconds. The tools required are available online for $40. The top deadbolt and the bottom key knob on that gate are the first locks that beginner locksmiths learn to pick. Within an hour of starting to train, beginners are opening locks exactly like the one on Nancy Guthrie's security gate. When Nancy Grace asked Wynn Yates directly whether all the coverage describing the gate as impossible to breach was accurate, he said 2 words, totally false. That revelation shifted the front door theory. It no longer required an inside accomplice to explain how the gate could be passed. Someone with a lockpick gun, a device available for $20 to $40 online, requiring minimal training, could have opened that gate quietly in the dark in under a minute. The backdoor theory, or the prop doors, the lock changes after processing, why Jennifer Coffindaffer's analysis has existed in the public record for weeks but has been under-examined. Until Savannah confirmed this week that the back doors were propped open when the family arrived, the detail existed primarily as investigative inference. Now it exists as a family member's direct account of what she and her siblings found when they arrived at their mother's home. What does it mean that the back doors were propped open? It could mean the suspects used them as a secondary exit after entering through the front. It could mean the suspects entered through the back and never approached the front at all, with the figure on the doorbell camera serving as a distraction or a camera-disabling operation conducted by one member of the team while others entered from behind. It could mean the property was known well enough in advance that someone understood which approach route was least visible, least covered by cameras, and most direct to the street or utility road at the rear of the property. What it cannot mean, in any reasonable interpretation, is that it happened accidentally. Doors in a residential home do not prop themselves open in the middle of the night while the resident is sleeping. Someone propped those doors, someone with a reason to prop them, someone who was either inside the property already when they were propped, or who entered from the back, propped them for rapid exit, and then moved through the house to reach Nancy. Former FBI Special Agent Steve Moore, who analyzed this case in depth through his conversations with Brian Enton on Brian Enton Investigates, made a specific and relevant observation about how trained operatives, and, by extension, criminals who study their targets, approach entry to a property. The goal is always to enter from the direction farthest from the sleeping occupant, to maximize time inside the property before being detected. If Nancy's bedroom was toward the rear of the house, you approach from the front. If it was at the front, you approach from the back. You study the layout. You plan your approach. You don't improvise when the objective is a person rather than a thing. The back doors being propped open is consistent with someone who had studied this. Someone who knew that propping the back door provided faster access from behind the property. From the utility road that neighbor Jeff Lemmy described running behind the homes on that street, he connecting through brush and cactus to a cul-de-sac, navigable in the dark for someone who had walked it before. Someone who understood that the front of the house was covered by a camera and that the back was the direction they needed to control. What does propped mean, exactly? A propped door is not just ajar, it is held open deliberately, usually by an object placed at the base of the door, or by some mechanism that keeps it from closing under its own weight. Someone put something there, or wedged it open, or disabled the latch. That is an action that takes a moment of deliberate thought. It is not the result of a door simply being pushed open and left. It is a decision. It is preparation. The three possible readings of that preparation are worth examining individually. The first reading is that the suspects entered through the back, propped the doors open before going in, and used the back as both entry and exit. Under this reading, the suspect on the doorbell camera was there specifically to disable the front camera, not to enter, but to eliminate a recording device. While he spent 15 minutes on the front porch, others were already inside through the back. When the camera was gone and the front was dark, the entire operation moved to completion, and Nancy was removed through the back doors that had been propped at the start. This reading is consistent with the blood evidence. Former FBI agent Maureen O'Connell analyzed the blood pattern at the front porch and said it was consistent with Nancy being carried, not walking, her head tilting as she was transported, with no void in the blood drops that would indicate footsteps. If Nancy was carried from inside the house to the front porch area, and that movement resulted in blood deposits, it is possible that the final exit was through the front gate, which a professional could have already picked open, while the initial entry and much of the operation happened through the back. The second reading is a coordinated two-team approach, one person at the front managing the camera and the gate, one or more people at the back managing entry and the detention of Nancy. The 41 minutes that the suspect spent inside the house, from the camera going dark at 1:47 a.m. to the pacemaker disconnecting at 2:28 a.m., reflects not a single person operating alone, but a coordinated operation where the front and back of the property were being managed simultaneously. Under this reading, the propped back doors are a signal of operational planning. The team at the back propped the doors when they arrived to ensure they could exit quickly with Nancy, regardless of what was happening at the front. Exits planned in advance. Entry and exit points coordinated. A level of preparation that is entirely consistent with what every investigator who has spoken about this case publicly has concluded. This was targeted, this was planned, this was not random. The third reading, and perhaps the most significant for understanding the January 11th date, is that the back doors were propped open because someone had been inside that property before and knew that the back entrance was the one that needed to be managed. Not just on the night of February 1st, but in advance. Someone who had accessed the back of the property, understood its layout, and on the night of the abduction propped those doors because they had already learned from a prior visit exactly why that entrance mattered. If something occurred on January 11th, which Pima County Sheriff Nanos confirmed based on the FBI's independent digital analysis, And if that occurrence involves someone at or near Nancy's property, the back doors now become part of a chain of preparation. Visit 1. Reconnaissance. Understanding the layout, testing the approach from the rear. Visit 2 or 3. Potentially testing the locks. Understanding the camera coverage, mapping the utility road behind the property. Night of February 1st. Execution, with back doors propped as part of a plan that was fully formed before anyone appeared on the front porch camera. Nobody has explained why the back doors were propped open. That explanation may exist inside the investigation, inside the FBI's files, inside the forensic analysis of the back entrance, inside the reports from the evidence technicians who processed that part of the scene. But it has not been shared publicly in 56 days of investigation. What does that silence mean? It could mean the detail is being protected because it connects to a specific investigative lead that officials don't want to compromise. It could mean the detail is less significant than the front door evidence and has not received dedicated public attention for that reason. It could mean investigators understand what the prop back doors mean and are not ready to signal that understanding to whoever is responsible for propping them. Or it could simply mean that in the flood of information, analysis, and coverage that has surrounded this case, a 3-second detail in a family member's interview, the back doors were propped open, has not received the examination it deserves. Until now. Savannah Guthrie explained it inadvertently in an interview with Hoda Cop because she was telling the story of what her family found when they arrived, and she was trying to explain why, in the first confused moments, there was a fragment of hope that maybe Nancy had simply had a medical episode. Because the back doors were open, maybe the paramedics came. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe it wasn't what it was. It was what it was, and the back doors being open is one of the details that tells us why. Former FBI agents who have analyzed this case have been consistent on one point across all of their public commentary. This was targeted. This was planned. This was not random. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos himself confirmed it. We believe we know why he did this, and we believe that it was targeted. The FBI agrees. Every piece of physical evidence at the scene supports that conclusion. The backpack already loaded, the holster positioned tactically. The 15 minutes spent deliberately disabling the camera rather than simply tampering with it and moving on. The pacemaker disconnecting at 2:28 a.m. and a vehicle captured 2.5 miles away at 2:36 a.m. And now the back door is propped open. A random intruder who stumbled upon an 84-year-old woman's home in the middle of the night does not prop the back doors. They enter, they act in a panic, they leave. They do not plan secondary exit routes. They do not think about camera coverage at the front while managing an escape route at the back. They do not spend 15 minutes on a porch deliberately disabling a camera while coordinating entry from a different direction. Someone planned this. Someone knew the property. Someone knew the back doors existed and understood their value as an exit or entry point. Someone came to that house on Camino Real in the Catalina foothills of Tucson, Arizona, on a Saturday night in the early hours of February 1st, 2026, and executed a plan that had been prepared in advance. Former FBI agent Steve Moore described the suspect on the doorbell camera as someone who was not Lex Luthor, holster in the wrong position, trying to cover a camera with leaves. Not a seasoned professional, not someone who had done this many times before at this level of sophistication, but someone who had planned enough to show up with a loaded backpack, a weapon, gloves, a mask, and 15 minutes of patience on the porch, and whose team, because the evidence points strongly toward more than one person, had prepared the back doors as part of their exit. Moore also said something in his analysis that deserves to be connected directly to the backdoor revelation. He noted that the investigation's failure to produce an arrest at this stage, given the apparent competence level of the suspects, is better explained by institutional friction than by the suspects being genuinely skilled at evading detection. Competent investigators dealing with someone who put their holster in the wrong position and tried to block a camera with branches should, under normal circumstances, have a name by now. The institutional friction Moore referenced between the Sheriff's Department and the FBI in the early days when crime scenes are processed and evidence preservation decisions are made is part of the context in which the backdoor detail exists. If the back of the house was the primary entry point, and if the early processing of the scene focused disproportionately on the front, on the doorbell camera footage, on the porch blood, on the security gate, then the back door could have received less forensic attention than it deserved in those critical first hours. That is not a confirmed failure. It is a question. One of many questions that the investigation has not answered publicly. What has been answered publicly as of this week is this. The back doors were propped open. Savannah Guthrie said so. Her family knew it from the moment they arrived. Investigators know it because they were there. And Jennifer Coffindaffer, a 25-year FBI veteran, knew something important about the back of the house because investigators changed the locks there after processing the scene. The picture that emerges from assembling those pieces is of a crime that entered from the back and exited through a route that was planned in advance. A crime that left blood at the front porch from a moment when Nancy was being carried through or near the front area of the house. But that used the back as both a primary entry point and possibly a primary exit route. A crime that required someone to be familiar enough with the property to know that propping the back doors was the right move. And a crime that left behind more questions than answers, including one that Savannah Guthrie inadvertently elevated this week with 3 seconds of an interview. Nobody has explained why the back doors were propped open. 56 days. And nobody has explained it publicly. But the investigation continues. The FBI has not stopped. And the evidence has not disappeared. The DNA from inside Nancy's home, male, unknown, not in the CODIS database, sent to a Florida laboratory, is still being analyzed. The digital analysis that led investigators to believe something occurred on January 11th is still active. The testimony of neighbors who saw things they didn't know were significant at the time is still being reviewed. The tips, more than 40,000 of them received over 56 days, are still being worked through by a task force that the FBI has not disbanded. If you have been following this case since February 1st and you have seen something or heard something that you have not yet connected to what you have been watching on the news, if you drove past Camino Real on an evening in January, if you noticed a vehicle parked on Escalante Street on a Saturday night, or if you know someone who works or worked in the Catalina foothills area around that time, this is the case that needs you to make one phone call. Contact the FBI tip line. Submit a tip online at tips.fbi.gov. The reward is $1.2 million. And Savannah Guthrie is returning to work on April 6th, with her mother still missing, with her family still unable to be at peace, with the back doors of her mother's home propped open in her memory, a detail she carried for 56 days before saying it out loud. "I will not let them take my joy," she said. "My joy will be my protest." And in the same breath, our anguish is real. We need help. We need someone to tell the truth. If that person is watching this, if that person knows something about what happened on Camino Real on the night of January 31st or the early morning of February 1st, if that person drove past those streets on January 11th or January 24th and saw something that didn't make sense at the time, if that person knows someone who knows something, if that person has been weighing the reward against the risk and has not yet made the call. The back doors were propped open. Someone knows why. Subscribe to Unsolved Archive for continued coverage of this case as every verified development emerges. Because this case can